All right, it is 11 o'clock, so we are going to get started. I just wanted to say welcome and thank you for joining us today. We hope that you are well and staying safe. Just a couple of logistics that I wanted to start off with today. All our attendees today are on mute with their video turned off, just to keep this free from other outside distractions. But we do want to keep this somewhat interactive, despite the fact that we are all attending virtually. So there will be a couple of very short interactive portions of this presentation. And so I'd like to explain just how those work a little bit so you know what to expect. There is a chat box in your Zoom program where you can type any general comments to us. And if we ask you to participate in a type of conversation or question and answer, you can type your comment into that chat box. Otherwise, if you have any questions for us, we would like you to use the Q&A box. And we will have ample time at the end of the presentation today to answer your questions. And we're really interested to hear what you'd like to know more about. So please do feel free to use the Q&A box, and we will get to those questions at the end of the presentation. So I'd like to introduce myself and our main presenter today. Bonjour, je m'appelle Megan. Hi, my name is Megan. I am a French to English translator, and I am located in Wisconsin in the United States. And our presenter today is Molly. Could you say hello to us, Molly?
Hola, soy Molly. Hello, I'm Molly.
So Molly is a Spanish to English translator, and she is located in Spain. And both of us are part of what's called the ATA School Outreach Program. So what is ATA? We wanted to introduce a little bit about what we do and why we're here today. So ATA is a professional association for translators and interpreters. And it's the largest professional association for these language professionals in the United States. But we do have an international focus as well. So we kind of spread our network all around the world, even though we are headquartered in the United States. The association provides training and educational opportunities and networking for professional translators and interpreters all over the world. In terms of school outreach, what is the school outreach program and what are we doing today? Molly and myself and two other volunteers who are with us on the call today, Birgit and Anne, we work to encourage professional translators and interpreters to visit schools and talk to students about careers in languages and why it's important to study languages. So we provide resources to help with presentation ideas and materials just to really encourage translators to get out and spread the word about our really exciting careers. On that note, and Molly will repeat this again at the end of the presentation, but we wanted to share today that if you are a language teacher and you would like a translator or interpreter to visit your students to speak to them directly, either right now, maybe something virtually, or in the future, maybe we could organize something in person. If that's something you're interested in, we'd love to help connect you to somebody, so please do reach out. And then on the other hand, if you happen to be a translator or interpreter yourself and you'd like to know more about how to visit a school and how to speak to students, that's what our program is here for as well. So if you'd like kind of inspiration or help reaching out to students, please let us know and we'd be happy to kind of give you a hand with that as well. And our contact information will be repeated for you at the end of the presentation by Molly. But if you'd like it right away, our email is schooloutreach@atanet.org. And once I'm finished introducing our presentation today, I'll type that in the chat box for you as well. So now back to this idea of ATA, our association, having members all around the world. We would like to see a little bit about where you are watching from today. So if you could tell us on our poll that will come up on your screen in just a second, if you could tell us where you're watching from today, we'd really like to hear from you. Okay, so it looks like we have, let's see, 2% from Asia. We have 7% from Europe, 75% from North America, and 16% from South America. So it's a pretty good variety. Thanks for sharing. So before I hand the reins over to Molly as our main presenter for the rest of the event today, I'd like to kind of kick off the event with a video that will show you about the day in the life of a translator or interpreter.
Translators and interpreters power the globe.
Oops. Start from the beginning here.
Translators and interpreters power the global economy. You may not see us at work, but we're behind the scenes helping the world communicate. Translators work with the written word, adapting written content from one language to another. Let's take a look at what a typical day looks like for a translator. Gaku is an English to Japanese translator. Here we see him working on Japanese subtitles for the latest episode of a binge-worthy show. Maria is an English to Spanish translator. She's translating a brochure for a Scottish art museum that's marketing towards Spanish tourists. John often edits German to English translations. Right now, he's working on a legal contract for a German bank that has branches in the US. Now, let's take a look at a day in the life of an interpreter. Interpreters work with spoken or sign language, helping people who don't speak the same language to communicate. Wayan is an Indonesian interpreter at a hospital in Bali. He's interpreting for an American who broke his leg while rock climbing. Annette and Jean are simultaneous interpreters. They're interpreting a French delegate's speech at the European Union headquarters. Sarah is a Somalian court interpreter. Today, she's working at a courthouse in Minnesota, interpreting for a witness to a crime. Both translators and interpreters are like bridges that connect different languages and cultures. We love our jobs, and we're excited to share a glimpse of our day with you. Thanks for tuning in.
Okay. Hi, everyone, and thanks for coming today to be with us. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I would like you to tell me if from the video, if you could tell the difference between a translator and an interpreter. So you can type your answers into the chat box there, and we'll see if anyone has the right answer. And we have a couple of reminders from the videos here on the screen.
And Molly, I'm keeping an eye on the answers, and I will read some out to you here.
Great.
All right. So yeah, it looks like we have quite a few people with the correct answer. So translation is written, and interpreting is spoken.
Great.
Good job, everybody.
A on your first assignment. Let's see. That is correct. So the main difference between translators and interpreters is that translators translate written text and interpreters interpret spoken language or sign language. Okay, so some examples for translators. Translators take things, for example, that in my case are written in Spanish and translate them into a different language, such as English. So translators might translate things like books, legal contracts, websites. So any company that wants to work internationally or sell in countries other than their native country need to usually translate their websites into different languages. And interpreters work with spoken or sign language. And that would include, for example, in the United States, medical appointments. So maybe if a patient doesn't speak English at all or very well, they will go with an interpreter to their medical appointments to be able to speak to the doctors and nurses and secretaries and everyone at the clinic or hospital. Court proceedings. So like we saw in the video, if someone, a witness or someone who has been charged with a crime doesn't speak English, they will go with an interpreter to help them communicate and get through their court proceedings. And conferences. This is another very popular place where interpreters work. International conferences such as at the European or the Union or the UN need interpreters to help them communicate, to help all the attendees communicate. Okay, and translators usually work from their second language into their native language. So for example, I'm originally from Minnesota. That's my first language or my native language. And my second language is Spanish. So I translate from Spanish into English. I take texts that are written in Spanish and I translate them into English. And one of the reasons for this is because my writing skills are always going to be stronger in English than they are in Spanish. So I'll be able to write the text in a way that sounds more natural than a non-native English speaker would. Okay. So let's take another poll here. I would love to know what languages, if you were a translator, what would one of the languages in your pair be besides English? So in my case, that would be Spanish. In Megan's case, for example, that would be French. So we'll bring up the poll here.
All right, and I'm keeping an eye on the poll and I will share the results after we have a few seconds here to let people respond.
Great. And if you have other, please type the language in the chat. We would love to know what other languages. I included here the most studied languages in the United States and also the most widely spoken languages in the United States. So I would love to see what other languages are in there.
Yeah, and we have a few others, so that's great. I'll be excited to share those with you. All right, so it looks like we have majority Spanish, then we have French, we have some German, Japanese. Let's see, one person responded Chinese, then we have two people responded Russian. But yeah, by far our highest numbers today are Spanish with 33 and then French with 9. And then as far as other, let's see, we had 6 people respond other. Let's see if I can find them all here. Looks like we have Thai, Dutch, Haitian Creole, Brazilian Portuguese, Hebrew, Ukrainian, and Italian.
Wow.
So great variety of languages here today.
That's great. Thank you for participating. So we have lots of different language combinations. If we built a translation company, we'd have a lot to choose from. Okay, and interpreters, like translators usually work in one direction, so from their second language into their native language, and interpreters usually work in both directions. There's a lot of different types of interpreting out there, and I won't go into too much detail today, but most interpreters can work in both language directions. So for example, when I now live in Spain, but when I used to live in the United States, I worked as a medical interpreter, and I would go to clinics and hospitals with patients who didn't speak English, and I would interpret in both directions. So I would help the patient communicate with the doctors, and the doctors communicate with the patient. There are other types of situations where interpreters will also interpret from their second language into their native language, and that would usually be in simultaneous interpreting settings, such as conferences, and in other settings. But for most cases, interpreters work in both directions. So another thing I would like you to write in the chat box, I'm wondering if you have ever worked with or seen an interpreter before in your day-to-day life. So for example, maybe if you are an immigrant living in the United States, maybe you've been to the doctor with an interpreter for a family member, or maybe you've just seen one when you've gone to the doctor's office, you've seen someone else with an interpreter. Maybe you've seen an interpreter in the movies. or in the news. So here in this corner, you can see an example I pulled from the news. Oftentimes with breaking news on TV, they'll have a sign language interpreter in the corner for the deaf or hard of hearing, so they can understand what the breaking news, what's going on TV. Do we have any responses in the chat box?
Yes.
For
So
interpreters?
yeah, we have a few. We have somebody says that they have seen ASL interpreters, so that's American Sign Language interpreters, at events and on the news. Another attendee says that they've seen subtitles on a French film, and they also help interpret for others at their high school between English and Spanish. Somebody says they have a friend who is an interpreter for the UN. That's very cool.
Oh, wow.
Let's see, we have somebody who is a professional accredited interpreter. We have somebody who says at a town hall meeting, a sign language and a Spanish interpreter. That's great. Let's see, somebody says we always have ASL interpreters at work meetings. That's really great. Somebody says they work at a court, and so they've seen interpreters there. Somebody has seen Spanish English interpreters at a film festival.
Oh, sure. For acceptance speeches, maybe.
Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, we have lots of great responses. Let's see.
Wow, that's great.
My mother used to be an interpreter. Many films I've seen and books I've read were translated. Yeah, there's lots of good responses here.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I didn't read the second point yet, but I suppose everyone's answering that already, which is fine. And the second question was if you've ever read anything that was translated before. So for example, maybe a book, subtitles on a foreign film, or the manual for your washing machine. I just got a new washing machine and the manual comes in a whole bunch of different languages. And I think this is really cool. This is the Harry Potter book in Russian. Of course, Harry Potter was translated into tons of languages since it was so popular. Do we have any new comments on the translation part?
Yes, let's see. A lot of books, different types of manuals. Somebody says they have a French copy of Harry Potter. That's great. Yeah, it looks like there are. Yeah, and then there were a few in the previous answers as well. Let's see, just read a sci-fi novel that was translated from Mandarin Chinese.
Oh, cool.
Very cool.
That's great. Wow, you guys have really seen translators and interpreters at work. Once you kind of start keeping your eye out for translators and interpreters, we start to kind of pop up everywhere. Because really the world needs us to communicate when they don't speak the same language. So it's great that all of you have seen us at work. Now, an important thing to keep in mind with careers in translation and interpreting is that, of course, the first prerequisite for becoming a translator or an interpreter is to have excellent language skills in your native language and your second language. So that means you need to speak, read, and write very well in more than one language. Your skills need to be really top-notch. And of course, if you would like to be a translator, your writing skills in your native language need to be really, really good. And if you want to be an interpreter, your speaking skills in both of your languages need to be very strong as well. And speaking two languages, although it's a good start, it's not enough. It's not for everyone, for sure. Both jobs are very challenging, and you need additional training to become a professional translator or interpreter. The qualifications required in every country in the world is very different, so it depends on where you're living, if you need special university training to be a translator or interpreter or not. But even if you don't need to study to become a translator or interpreter, it's good to do some training, even if it's self-training or taking any courses that you can take on your own to become trained and to do your job professionally. And usually translators and interpreters specialize in a field they like and know a lot about. So for example, I'm a Spanish to English translator and I specialize in tourism. So I translate things like guidebooks, travel blogs, airline websites, travel articles, and things like that. I really enjoy it. It's something I really, really like and know a lot about. And one of the ways that I specialized in translation in tourism and travel is by reading. I spent a lot of time reading lots of magazines and guidebooks and websites for tourism, and taking lots of notes and creating my own style guides and my own guidelines to follow in my work. And that's how I specialized in this field. But there are lots of specializations out there. The most popular and well-known, and what people usually think of when we talk about translation especially, is literature. So books, novels, textbooks, those types of things. But there are lots of other specializations. Translators and interpreters can specialize in finance, for example, in law, whether that's to translate any type of legal documents, contracts, or to interpret in the court of law. And here in the middle, we have subtitling. I'm actually taking a course at the moment to become more specialized in subtitling. It's something I'm interested in, so I'm taking a course on that right now. And that would be to either do subtitles for foreign films or also just to subtitle in English for the deaf and hard of hearing. There's advertising. If you think of your iPhone, for example, if you have an iPhone or any type of cell phone or smartphone nowadays, they're sold all across the world to billions of people worldwide, and that advertising has to be translated and adapted to local markets where it's going to be sold. Healthcare, like we talked about before, if you think in the United States, a lot of people don't, English isn't their native language, and so they need an interpreter to go to the doctor, or maybe they need a translator to translate all of the forms, the intake forms, the medical intake forms, or any type of pamphlets or patient care type documents need to be translated into different languages. And another one that is very popular now is video game localization. Video games are another thing. They're played all over the world. Kids and adults alike are playing video games everywhere, and they have to be translated and adapted into different languages. Okay. But some problems can come up if you don't work with a professional translator or interpreter. That can cause problems. Okay, some translation mistakes can be funny, but some can be very serious. So this would be a funny one, right? We have, welcome tourist, we speak English, which actually you can read, you can understand. It's full of errors. So this would be more of a funny translation mistake, okay? It's funny, but it also makes your business look unprofessional. It looks like you didn't invest and take the time that you needed to take to have someone translate this well. And so it doesn't reflect very well on your business. Okay. This would be one that's a little bit more serious, a little bit more dangerous. This is looks to me, I don't read French, so I don't know what it says, but it looks to me like it's a warning sign. Somewhere in France probably. And it says, beware slippery people over 5 not allowed. I assume it's saying beware slippery kids under 5 not allowed, or people over more than 5 people not allowed. We're not sure. And this could be potentially dangerous if it's a warning sign and it's not translated well. Someone could hurt themselves because they can't read what the sign says. This is another funny one. A construction site is trouble for you, excuse. I think maybe it's trying to say, we hope we're not bothering you. We apologize for the inconvenience, something like that, but we don't really know. And then there are very expensive translation mistakes. So these are 3 examples of some of the most popular translation errors that have resulted in very big financial losses for these companies, and also in making them look, once again, not very professional. So HSBC Bank in 2009 had to spend $10 million rebranding on a rebranding campaign to repair the damage done when it catchphrase assume nothing was mistranslated as do nothing in various countries. Of course, assume nothing and do nothing are two very different things, and you don't really want a bank telling you to do nothing because then you won't hire them or you won't work with them. Pepsi, their slogan, "Come alive with Pepsi," in Chinese apparently read as bringing your dead ancestors back to life. A word-for-word translation of the slogan could just as easily turn this into "this will raise the dead." Okay, so it's kind of Pepsi's telling you if you drink Pepsi, it'll bring your dead ancestors back to life. I mean, maybe some people would like that. It sounds a little spooky to me, and definitely not good for their image. And they definitely had to spend a lot of money to rebrand and make people trust them again in China. And KFC, also in Chinese, Kentucky Fried Chicken slogan, "Finger licking good," was translated as "eat your fingers off." So instead of saying "eat our chicken," they said "eat your fingers off," which is not good. So if they would have invested in quality translators and invested some money in that, they would have saved themselves a lot of money in the long run. A lot of times people ask me, is there enough work for translators and interpreters? Who needs translators and interpreters? Because oftentimes we are kind of behind the scenes. And the truth is, a lot of people need us. Like I mentioned before, hospitals and clinics and courts, international business. So if you think about McDonald's, for example, they have restaurants all over the world, and they have to translate all of their menus, all of their advertising, all of their TV commercials into different languages. And oftentimes they have to localize. Their materials for their foreign markets. In this case, localize would mean something like they have to, instead of translating it, just translating the words or the idea behind it, they have to adapt it to the market. So one example of this is that in McDonald's in Mexico, I was recently in Mexico, and on their condiment table, they have jalapenos, right? In the United States, you would never see jalapenos next to the ketchup, but in Mexico, they do. And here in Spain, for example, McDonald's has different types of hamburgers than in the States. They have different ingredients, different sauces, different flavors that are adapted. So that's another part of translating and culturally adapting things to different markets. International entities. So the United Nations, for example, has 6 official languages, and the European Union has 24 official languages. So anything that is officially published by these entities needs to be translated into all of the languages, and any of their conferences and meetings, they have to have interpreters at those meetings so that they can all communicate. Government entities, so for example, the CIA in the United States has a team of translators and interpreters that work for them. And businesses like Apple, Microsoft, and Samsung. So once again, when you think about all of the apps on your cell phone or your smartphone, all of the software and hardware in your computer, the video games that you play, all of the operating systems and everything that goes into these things need to be translated and adapted to different markets. The World Health Organization, especially during this coronavirus pandemic, the World Health Organization has to translate critical information into many languages so that the entire world has access to that information, which is so important right now. And another example would be the US Armed Forces. So the US Armed Forces uses interpreters and translators in their work around the world. So when they're deployed and working in different countries, they need people to help them communicate with the locals. And can you make a career out of translation and interpreting? I get this question a lot too. And translation and interpreting are professional careers with strong growth. Jobs in our profession are expected to grow 18% through 2026, and that's much faster than the average for all occupations. Globalization, as the world grows and we communicate more and more, we need more and more translators and interpreters to help make that happen, or else no one can talk to each other. And just kind of two little fun facts. Interpreters' rates are often based on duration of assignment, so depending on how long it lasts. Their specialization, so depending on how technical or how difficult the situation is, and the type of service. So like I mentioned before, there's lots of different types of interpreting. There's simultaneous interpreting and consecutive interpreting are the two most common, and that can sometimes affect the rates and how much interpreters are paid. And translators' rates are often based upon word count. So if you get a document that's 10,000 words long, you usually estimate how much you'll charge for that based on the number of words. It's also determined by language pair. So if you have a very common language pair, the prices will usually be lower. And if you have a rare language pair, for example, if you translate Spanish and Japanese, which is a very rare language combination, maybe you can charge more. This, of course, depends on a lot of factors, on how you're marketing yourself, how long you've been working as a translator or interpreter. There are plenty of translators working in more common language pairs that make a very good living. But generally speaking, people with rare language pairs are able to charge more. Okay. And also the text complexity. So just like interpreters with their specializations, translators who work with very difficult, complex, technical texts may usually make more money, okay? Because they might be one of the only experts in that field who can translate accurately and do a good job, so they can charge more for that. Okay. So to kind of wrap up here, as we wrap up, if you have any questions, you can start typing them into the Q&A box. And I would say for the students that are here today, if you are interested in learning more about a career in translation and interpreting, you can visit the ATA website for more information. We also have here a list of universities that offer studies in translation and interpreting, and the list includes universities all throughout the world. Okay, so if you would like to look for a university near you that offers studies in this, you can check our link here. And if you have any specific questions, if you want to talk to a translator or an interpreter, if you would like to just ask us any questions, you can email us, schooloutreach@atanet.org. And you can also contact your local ATA chapter or affiliated group. Okay. So the ATA has many chapters and groups throughout the country. This is a little map of all of the different chapters and affiliated groups. So Texas has 2, for example. Minnesota, where I'm from, has UMSHA. Florida, there's all these different chapters and associations. Maybe you want to do a job shadow, or you want to reach out to someone more local, closer to you, you can reach out to these chapters and groups as well. And if you would like the contact information for some of them and you can't find it, feel free to send us an email and we can put you in touch. And for teachers, like Megan talked about at the beginning, if you would like to have an ATA volunteer present to your students, either virtually or on site next year, hopefully we'll be all back at school next year, you can send us an email and we will try and find someone in your area if you wanted an on-site presentation, or if you wanted to set up a virtual presentation similar to that, we can do that too. And if you would like to give your own presentation to your students about translation and interpreting, you can visit our website for free resources for all grades and ages. And that will be here, that's here as well. And there you can search presentations and different ideas per age group. So that's very useful. Okay. And you can type your questions into the Q&A box. And while you do that, Megan and I are going to do a little interpreter role play here.
Right. So normally when one of us or anybody else participating in school outreach, normally when we do a presentation in a classroom, it's very fun to get the audience involved and do some activities as much as we can. So we're trying to mimic that a little bit today, virtually. So what Molly and I are going to do is demonstrate interpreting. One thing that we do want to share is this is mostly as like a challenge and kind of like a silly thing. Neither Molly nor myself are interpreters, so we are actually both translators. So this is not what we do professionally, so we're not going to do a good job. This is mostly just to kind of have a little fun challenge. And also worth noting is that we are each going to try to interpret the other person's working language. So for example, I'm going to speak French and Molly is going to try and interpret what I'm saying, even though she doesn't speak French, and vice versa. So Molly will say a little sentence or two in Spanish and I will try and figure out what she's saying. So again, this isn't a demonstration of what a professional interpreter would do. This is more of just a challenge and a game for each other. And so while we're doing this, if you'd like to type in your questions in the box, feel free to take a minute or so extra to do that. And Molly and I will do our challenge. So I'm going to speak something in French to Molly, and then Molly, you try and interpret what I say.
Okay.
I've tried to think of something ahead of time. Let's see if I remember. Okay. J'ai un chien, Dusty. Il aime beaucoup passer des heures sur le canapé. Il aime aussi manger des carottes.
Oh no, I have no idea. I think I got dog Dusty.
Yes.
Okay. I think that's about all I could get out of that.
Okay.
I know like 2 words in French. What was it? What was the correct interpretation of that?
So I have a dog, Dusty. He likes to spend hours on the couch. And he also likes to eat carrots.
Okay. The carrot, what's carrot in French?
Carrot.
Okay. It's the same. That's funny. I thought I heard, okay, I kind of heard a carrot in there. That was a fail.
Well,
Sounds like your dog's really cute though. Okay, so here's a shot at Spanish. This is just a short 1-sentence thing. Llevo 10 años viviendo en España y me encanta vivir aquí.
Ooh, that's challenging. Okay, so you've lived in Spain for 10 years and you like living there?
Yeah.
Wow.
Good job. Yes.
Okay, well that was fun.
Usually the only thing would be in Spain, at least, they use encantar, which is usually translated as love. They love, but really, yeah, spot on. Good job.
Wow.
I'm very impressed.
Learning Spanish.
Okay, and now the challenge is on all of you. So I have a sentence here in Spanish, since most of the people here today work with or speak Spanish or know some Spanish. I have a Spanish sentence I'm going to read, and I would like you to type in the translation into English into the chat box. So not in the Q&A box, in the chat box. Okay. The sentence is, los delfines duermen con un ojo abierto. So I'll read it again.
I'll keep an eye on the box for the answers. I'll let you read it again.
Okay.
I see some coming in.
Okay. Los delfines duermen con un ojo abierto.
All right. So we have the answers pouring in here. We have a lot of people responding. Dolphins sleep with one eye open.
Correct.
Wow. Is that true, or is that more of a...
It is. I was thinking of what to do for this sentence, and I started looking up just fun facts. And so dolphins sleep with one eye open. It's true, because they only one side of their brain sleeps at the same time at once.
Wow.
So when the left hemisphere is sleeping, their right eye closes, and when their right hemisphere is sleeping, their left eye closes.
Very interesting.
So,
well, nice work to our audience who participated. That was great. We had a lot of participation. And if you're ready, Molly, I can start getting to some questions.
sure.
And wherever you like, we can both respond, or one or the other, however we feel appropriate. Let's see here. There were some questions kind of thrown into the chat box that I'd like to get to first. Let's see. Okay. So one person was wondering, I guess if I were to summarize, if somebody has like one language at home, maybe a different language in their community or at school, if they have multiple languages that they're using on a regular basis, how can we advise them on like what direction they would want to translate or where they would really want to focus their studies? What do you think about that?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. I would think, first you'd have to think about whether you want to do translation or interpreting. If you want to do translation, then I would say you could try and, pick your language pair and the direction based on where your writing skills are strongest. Okay, so maybe you grew up speaking Spanish at home, but you went to school mostly in English, and so you write really well in English. Your Spanish writing skills aren't so strong, so maybe for translation, you would want to opt to do Spanish to English. But there are definitely translators, I know of translators anyway, who were raised bilingually at home and where their parents raised them to read, write, speak, and do everything in both languages equally. And those people do, I know a few translators that work in both directions. They don't just specialize in one. There aren't many people, I think I've only met two before. And for interpreting, since you can go in both directions or have, multiple language pairs, that's not quite so much of an issue, I would say. Do you have any thoughts on that, Megan? Other than that?
Right. I mean, it's hard to make one rule that applies to every scenario. So like you said, it really depends on your personal experience. But I guess, yeah, the one thing I would really highlight is that for translation especially, you really need to be confident that your writing skills are the best they can be in that language that you choose for your, what we call the target language. So the language that you're translating into. So if you're really having a tough time, I would say maybe that would help you determine a little more. Really think about, okay, where are my strongest writing skills? Because in translation, that's really where you really need like the most skill is in that target language writing. Let's see. Do you think that with, I mean, we can both answer this, but there's a lot of translation software and online platforms. Do you think that they pose a threat to us as professional translators?
I personally don't. I recently attended a chat about machine translation and the future of it, and a lot of the vast majority of the content, translated content now, is already translated by machines. If you think of all the content that Facebook and Airbnb and I don't know if Twitter has the automatic translate button on it.
I think they do, yeah.
But they're, those machines are already translating more content than humans can. The difference is that, the machines are only getting the gist of it, and humans can go deep into content. And so, and be specialized and produce really accurate, good translations that a machine can't quite do yet. So, of course, machine translation is going to grow. It's going to become stronger. But I think what will happen is it will be replacing a lot of the really general texts that are non-specialized and don't necessarily need to be 100% accurate. Some of that work will go away, but as long as you're a specialized professional translator and you do a good job and you really work hard to market your services, I don't see it wiping out our profession anytime soon. I mean, human language it's human. So I don't think machines will be taking that away from us anytime soon.
Right, yeah, and I agree with you. I think a way that I try to summarize it when I get that question from people who are, outside our little bubble of linguists is I describe it as anything that you hire a professional writer to do, that's something where a professional translator should be used as well. So if a company is hiring professional writers to write all of their content, no matter what it is, communications, anything that's published in print or online, if somebody is professionally sitting down to write that, the chances are when it comes time to translate that, you need a professional to do it. You can't just feed that to a machine most of the time to achieve the same end result. So that's kind of how I like to describe it, just to kind of simplify it, obviously, but that's one of the ways I like to look at it.
I will be using that in the future. That's a great way to explain it.
Okay, we have another question about what made you decide to get into translation in the first place?
For me, so I was lucky enough to go to Spanish immersion school in Minnesota. And so I was speaking Spanish relatively fluently from first grade. We weren't allowed to speak English at school. And Spanish was always something that I really, really loved. And I also happen to love writing. So I've always written a lot, and I loved Spanish. And so I kind of stumbled on translation completely by accident in college. Someone actually asked me to do a translation, and I was like, and offered to pay me for it. And I was like, wait, what? This is something I can do? And that's actually one of the reasons that I'm really into the school outreach program, is because I wish someone would have told me about this career option, you know, before I started college. I would have taken college differently. I would have gone a different route, I think. So it was kind of the perfect combination of my two passions, which are Spanish and writing. So for me, it was just kind of a natural choice.
Yeah, great. And I would say I have a similar story in terms of it really boils down to my passion as well. From a young age, I knew that I wanted to do something in writing. And I would say the language component kind of came a little later. I didn't quite connect the dots. I mean, I had been studying French since I think I was maybe 9 or 10 when I started. And so I really had that solid foundation of language skills. And I also had a very strong interest in writing. For some odd reason, I didn't really connect those two until maybe the end of my bachelor's degree. I would say I kind of became aware of it as a profession and something I could look into. But until then, I had, in my mind, they were kind of like separate tracks, but like you said, they fit together so well. And yeah, I ended up finding, I wasn't quite sure what to do. I was about to graduate from a bachelor's program in French and English. I was doing a double major, and I wasn't quite sure what to do next. And I ended up finding out actually from that list that you shared of educational programs offering translation and interpreting studies. I actually just randomly Googled, you know, where can I study translation? And I found that list, and I ended up going to a school on that list for my master's degree. So I got a master's in translation, and kind of the rest is history. But yeah, and I would say one thing I kind of wanted to share, since this does come up in a lot of these types of presentations, you know, I like to say that there isn't one right path to becoming a translator. I think as long as the person is very serious about getting what they feel is the adequate amount of training that they need, as long as they are really confident that they're doing their due diligence, they're really putting in the time and the training to get their skills up to a very professional level, I think that's what's really important. And how you get there can be really different depending on the person. So some people might study specifically in a translation program. Other people might work in a completely different job and then become a translator later. There's really no right or wrong answer in terms of the specific steps you take to get there, as long as you are, you know, making sure that you are pursuing the training that's needed. So let's see here. I'm just scrolling through the chat to make sure I didn't lose any. Right, so we had right, we had a couple questions of like how, what path should I take? So I think we kind of covered that in terms of there's no wrong path per se. Let's see. I'm going to go to the questions list now. So Molly, do you know if there's enough demand for a career in scientific documents?
I don't translate scientific documents, but definitely. I know a few translators who work in scientific, and it's definitely one of those areas where there's a lot of demand, and you need to know your stuff. You need to be an expert in that. So, and there are a lot of people who become translators maybe after deciding that the career that they studied and they started working and wasn't for them. Like they liked the subject area, but maybe the job wasn't for them. So there are translators who were maybe a lawyer before, and they're like, oh, I'm bilingual. This lawyer thing isn't for me. I know a lot about the whole legal world, and I'm going to become a legal translator. So that's definitely a path that a lot of people take. So if science is something that you're into and you want to pursue that, I think there's definitely demand there.
Yeah, and I would say the same. I think I've certainly seen quite a lot of demand for it. I think the more specialized fields, there's less. It's not something that everyone can do, right? So the more specialized your knowledge and experience, actually, the more that sets you out from the crowd as a professional who really knows what they're doing. So I would certainly say there appears to be a lot of scientific work, though. Yeah, I personally don't work in scientific texts, but from what I understand, there is quite a lot out there. Let's see. Any recommendations? Okay, any recommendations for reaching out to high school students now that they're not in school? I think part of what our motivation for this event today is hopefully this could inspire people to do their own virtual visits to students. And Molly and myself and the other members of our team, Anne and Birgit, we're all happy to kind of connect the dots if you need help figuring out how to present to students virtually. But we hope that throughout on a normal school year, quote unquote, we encourage we encourage translators and interpreters to visit schools. But we're hoping that now that we have slightly different circumstances, we're hoping that maybe translators and interpreters might want to take these visits virtual. So this could kind of act as an example, but we are happy to help with logistics if anyone needs ideas or kind of resources for how to get that ball rolling. Let's see here. We have a few questions about asking about like what school specifically. I think it really depends on your location and your language and what subject areas are interesting to you. But just to generally answer a few of these questions that came in, I would say, yes, there are some programs that do offer training entirely online. And who knows, I'm sure that some of the ones that didn't previously offer online training are now maybe switching to a hybrid model or maybe even fully online options. So definitely check out that list that Molly shared. It has really something for everyone, I would think. Let's see, I guess. Oh, right.
Screen.
Just scrolling through here. We do have a question about CAT tools. I know we didn't explain what a CAT tool is. If you could maybe give us just a general description of what a CAT tool is for the audience.
So a CAT tool is a computer, I actually don't know what it stands for. It's computer assisted translation. Is that it? I do have a CAT tool. I haven't said the acronym in a while. So a CAT tool is a tool that translators use to help them translate. Okay, so Actually, Megan, do you have experience explaining this?
Sure. I like to explain it as it's hard to really explain it down to something very simple, but I guess the best description I can give would be, think of a CAT tool as a brain, and the brain remembers our translations for us. So it's not creating the translation for us. That would be called machine translation. A CAT tool, well, I guess now CAT tools might offer machine translation functions. So obviously this topic can get complicated very quickly. But in the traditional sense, what the purpose of a CAT tool is using something called a translation memory. And so that memory acts as a brain. And what it does is it remembers everything that the human translates. So it's not replacing the human, but it's helping us remember certain words that we use, how we translate certain sentences, and it could help us a lot to keep translations consistent over time. So if I have a client who always wants the word, I always want certain words from their terminology translated a very specific way, a CAT tool can help me remember that. Just to give a really stripped down example, that's kind of how I would explain it to someone who maybe hasn't heard of a CAT tool before. But yes, it can get very complicated, and there's a lot of pros and cons depending on what it's being used for. But yeah, that's kind of how I would describe it. There are many different options out there, and it really depends on your personal preference, what kind of features you're looking for. The one thing I wouldn't say one tool is the best of all. I think it really depends on a personal basis, but one thing to keep in mind is that many tools offer either a completely free version that's free forever, but it just has fewer features, or some tools actually offer a free trial of their full version with all the bells and whistles, but it might be limited to something like 60 days or something like that. So before committing to a tool, definitely do some research and play around and get to know it before you actually purchase it. That would be my number one tip in that area. Okay, well, I think we might have time for one more question. And feel free to contact the email address that we shared. It's also on the screen. If there's anything that we didn't respond to, or really if you want any kind of connection with the school outreach program, feel free to reach out. But yeah, let's end with, someone says they've been a Spanish teacher in a secondary school, and they're thinking about changing careers. Do you have any tips for kind of how to make a transition from a different career into translation or interpreting?
I actually did the same thing. So translation, like I said, I found out about it in college, and it's always kind of in the back of my mind. And once I graduated, I moved to Spain, and I started working as an English teacher. And about 2 years into English teaching, I started working as a translator part-time, or freelance translator. So I took a few translation business courses on how to grow my business. And I started working on growing a small translation business as a freelancer. And it took me probably five years. I was also moving at a really slow pace, I will say, but it took me probably 5 years to feel confident quitting my teaching job and replacing that with translation-based income. So it worked out well for me. I started to work also, as the years went by, I started to work less and less hours as a teacher to give more room for translation. And I just built it alongside that other income that I had as a teacher, which worked really, really well for me. So it does take a little, if you really put all of your effort into growing a translation business, you could probably replace your income in maybe 2 years, 2 or 3 years. I don't know. It's different for everyone, but I would definitely say take it, step by step and try to do it alongside teaching for a while, also to see if you think it's for you and if you like it too.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great great example to share. And I think I've heard similar stories from many professional translators who, yeah, just kind of transition gradually, not only to you know, have the steady job while they try it out, but also, like you said, to really get a feel for if they do like it. I think some people, you know, with very good intentions, they might think it might be a good fit for them, but then maybe they start and they think, oh, you know what, I actually feel much more passionate about teaching, and maybe that's a better fit for me right now. And it can always change over time. But I think having the opportunity to kind of test it out and just see if it works for you and your lifestyle, and if it does, then great, and you can kind of amp it up as you go gradually. But yeah, I think that's a great way to kind of try it out. So I think we will probably end it here since we are at an hour. But I just wanted to thank you, Molly, for a great presentation today. And thank you everyone who attended and participated in our activities and sent us questions. It's so good to see this turnout today, and we're so happy to share a little bit about what we do. And of course, feel free to reach out at any time. Yeah, so we'd love to hear from you in the future, and stay safe.
Thanks everyone. Thanks, Megan.